Politics is a game all about momentum, and British Columbia Premier David Eby and his BC NDP are showing us all how to lose that game. At the start of this year, 2024, the BC NDP could be pulling above their next closest opponent by anywhere from 18% to 28%. It was going to be an absolute slaughter for the BC NDP come the fall election. But David Eby and his cabinet were full of ego and hubris, and they didn't think they could possibly lose. So then they proceeded to do and say the stupidest possible things that they could think of. And now, in the new Main Street Research poll, they're tied with John Rustad's BC Conservatives, and that is just the mildest of the bad news. When you actually dig down into this poll a little bit further, it gets much, much worse. There's a reason why, as the BC Conservatives have been pointing out, that NDP cabinet ministers have just been resigning and saying they're not running again. And that's not even including other members of the BC NDP caucus. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's weird, because even in this poll, a lot of these people might be able to retain their seats. They're tied with the Conservatives. They're not behind or anything. And other polls, like one I talked about a couple of days ago, they are ahead by 2 points. Okay, sure. The problem with that is, unless you know the background of British Columbia politics, these poll results are doomsday for the NDP, because the BC Conservatives didn't exist effectively a year ago. It was only 2 MLAs that were part of the BC Conservative caucus. John Rustad had just taken the reins of a party that only got 2% in the last election a few months before. And now, seeing that they're tied with the BC NDP probably shows that it's much worse than most people think. Because a lot of people, not like you and I, who don't follow politics very closely. And so as more people start paying attention to the provincial election coming up in October, a lot more people are going to be following the trend that we've already seen taking place over this last year and shifting towards the BC Conservatives. A lot of people probably still think this next election is between the BC Liberals and the BC NDP. Again, most people follow sports, they follow entertainment. They are psychopaths like you and I who really like talking about politics all the time. But before I get into some of the underlying numbers of this poll, I will urge you, if you live in British Columbia, in the description of this video and the top pinned comment, there is a donation link to donate to the BC Conservatives. Please donate to them, because if you don't put a down payment on the BC Conservatives' victory, well, we can't be shocked that even if nobody likes the NDP, they just overwhelm the Conservatives with a lot more money for advertising, volunteers, leafleting, and all that. So if you live in British Columbia, if you don't donate, you can't expect anyone else to donate. You get 75% back on a tax credit if you donate $100, and I would still encourage you to spend more than that. When I was 20 years old in the 2020 leadership election, had donated like $1,500 to one of the candidates as somebody who didn't have a lot of money, because I spend money on things I believe in. But anyways, here is the poll results. So let's just start at the top line results and go through the decided, undecided voters, and all voters. We'll start with all voters, and this mixes in people who are maybe less likely to vote and a lot of people who are still undecided. And this shows that the BC Conservatives are at 33%, the NDP is at 33%, the Greens are at 10%, the United Party is embarrassingly at 8%, and 2% of people are also saying they're looking for another party. Those 2% are probably Christian Heritage Party voters, but even they, I would assume, would probably shift towards the BC Conservatives. People don't realize this who don't live in British Columbia and don't follow politics very closely. Because the Conservatives weren't really a party as of a couple of years ago, Christian Heritage could actually punch as high as 10 to 20% in some rural ridings, simply because there really wasn't a clear conservative alternative. So why not pick your dream party, which the CHP is for a lot of, more like reform-minded, like Baptist, Protestant Christians. A lot of the Calvinists vote for the CHP. But now let's move on to decided and undecided voters, with many of the less likely to vote people filtered out. It's 35 Conservative, 35 NDP, 11 Green, and 10 United. Now, when we go to just decided voters, people who know who they're going to vote for and are unlikely to change, although I think that's not quite right. I think a lot of NDP voters, as more news comes out showing how radical the NDP has become under Eby, they will shift. The Bonnie Henry story of her proposing selling drugs in retail convenience stores is going to get a lot of people to pay attention to the sort of people who are currently staffing the BC NDP government. They can't pretend, well, we disagree with Bonnie Henry on this one, because they've never disagreed with her before, and they're probably only saying that this proposal is too radical now because they know it's an election issue if they say that they support it. If they win, 100% they're going to come back and say, actually, let's reconsider this proposal to sell safe supply drugs in a local 7-Eleven. But this decided only voter poll has the BC Conservative at 37, NDP 37, Greens at 12, that's great to see, and United at 10. And although a lot of Conservative voters out there are going to think, well, we need to merge with United or the NDP might still get in, I can guarantee you, based on the underlying federal polling for who people in different parties are going to vote for, United is actually keeping votes away from the NDP more than it's keeping votes away from the BC Conservatives, because United is full of a lot of federal Liberals and some federal NDP, and that is keeping votes out of Metro Vancouver from the hands of David Eby. So I actually fully encourage Kevin Falcon to stick around at this point. It's going to be great seeing the transition between NDP voters mocking the BC Conservatives and United, and that they can't win unless they come together, and know it, and they're like mocking the Conservatives because United might stop the Conservatives from winning, to now whining that United's stopping them from being able to win. But after those surface level numbers, let's quickly jump down to, before we jump down to the would you vote, would you not vote statistics, I just want to show this this post from Sharia Teest on X. So you guys should actually go follow him on X. You can see his handle up there, Real Albanian Pat. He does good seat projections, and he was actually one of the few people who was right that the Conservatives were going to win in Toronto St. Paul, and was pretty much exactly on the outcomes in that riding. And he shows, based on this poll and his model, that the Conservatives, even on this poll where the NDP and the Conservatives are tied, the Conservatives would get 47 seats, NDP 45, Greens 1, which would be a 1-seat majority for the BC Conservatives. Obviously, I think they need way more than that. I want them to have a 10, 20-seat majority so they can just reverse every stupid decision inside the NDP government and not have to worry if, someone in the BC Conservatives tragically passes away and now the entire thing is a toss-up again. But now I want to go to Main Street Research's polling on each of the main 4 parties, and would people consider voting for them, or would they not consider voting for them? Because this is where everything becomes a complete horror show for the BC NDP, and where you will understand why I'm saying they're dead in the water. This is all where the momentum is. Do you have ability to grow, or do you not have ability to grow? So let's start from least relevant to most relevant. And the least relevant, thanks to Mr. Kevin Falcon and his cunning political instincts, he now has the party that the least amount of British Columbians will ever consider voting for. So 65% of people say that they will not consider voting for BC United. Only 23% say they will vote for them, or they are open to voting for them. Obviously, when you look at all voters, only 8% of people wanted to vote for them here. And in the decided, there was 10. So they are way below their numbers for people who are actually considering voting for them and following through within the polls. But now let's jump over to the Greens, because this should be utterly terrifying for the BC NDP. Because obviously there is not a lot of crossover between British Columbia Green voters and the BC Conservatives. There might be some. There are some voters I'm not trying to insult anyone. I describe as granola voters. They tend to be very freedom-minded, more naturalistic people. They tend to not like big pharma. They don't like big government, but they will still vote for the Greens based on some more smaller issues around natural medicines and around, just general conservation type efforts. But the BC Greens have 56% of people saying that they will consider voting for them, 26% of people saying that they definitely won't, and 19% saying that they don't know whether they'd vote for them or not. That's crazy, because you can assume that that 56% is mostly coming from the center left to the far left. And so the BC NDP, being a party that tracks actually pretty closely with the Greens, they might lose a lot of votes to them, especially if David Eby and his government keeps embarrassing themselves. And again, as the Conservatives keep pointing out, having cabinet ministers jumping ship is a bad look. And if people think that David Eby is going down in flames, because he is, a lot of people might start jumping over to the Greens because it's more of their idealist party. People tend to vote in a more idealist fashion when they think the more pragmatic pick can't even win, so why not vote for my dream team party? That's again where when there's no conservative option and nobody likes the BC Liberals and they likely weren't going to win the 2020 election, a lot more people voted for the Christian Heritage Party. So now let's jump over to the BC Conservatives, because this is great news for John Rustad and the Conservatives. Obviously, it's a more polarizing party because a lot more people know about them, and the mainstream media and the NDP opening fire on them all the time means that a lot of people are either going to like them or not like them. But good news, the BC Conservatives have 51% of British Columbians saying that they are open to voting for them. Only 40% saying they are not considering voting for the BC Conservatives, but there's still 8% who don't know. And even if that just split right down the middle, there's about 55% of BC residents who would consider voting for the BC Conservative Party, which tracks pretty closely with where the federal Conservatives and Pure Polyev are at. In the new, I actually should go look this up in a second here, but the federal Conservatives in British Columbia are very close to, if not a little bit above 56% or 50%. And so that tracks closely to where the BC Conservatives are currently at, with having 51% of people, minus the 8% who don't know if they consider them or not, willing to consider voting for them in this provincial election. And it would be hard for me to believe that anyone outside of very, very soft red Tories who are voting federal Conservative wouldn't then also cast a ballot for John Rustad and the BC Conservatives. You know, how many people are really going to vote Polyev federally, but then say, well, I might throw a vote behind Kevin Falcon or might throw a vote behind David Eby, the two men who either were supporting the carbon tax up until 5 seconds ago in the case of Falcon, or they still support the provincial carbon tax as David Eby does. But now we are on our main course, or it's kind of a bit of a dessert. It's a bit of a main course and a dessert in one. Here is the BC NDP numbers for whether or not people will consider voting for them. Only 44% of people would consider voting for the British Columbia New Democratic Party, with 54% saying no, a straight no, and only 2% saying they don't know. Let's just give those two to David Eby just to play devil's advocate. And when it comes to the BC NDP, the devil's advocate part, the devil part of the advocate is very strongly used. That really, it's a basic, this is a horrible number. At tops, they have 46% of people who will consider voting for them. And so they're already close to maxing it out when it comes to the voters. This is based on all voters. And so when you go to all voters here, the NDP has 33%. So max, they can maybe grow, let's just use the 44. They can maybe grow another 11%, where the Conservatives, going from 33 to 51, can grow another, doing the math because I'm stupid, 18%. That's great for the BC Conservatives. And so they have the voter enthusiasm, they have momentum, they have room to grow, and their people actually know what they're voting for. The BC NDP voters are voting for a government that's performed horribly. Especially their healthcare performance is horrific. The wait times in British Columbia are now 27.7 weeks. They are now having people go down to, I believe, Washington State in order to get cancer chemo treatment, because it's just can't be done in BC because of how horribly they've managed the healthcare system. He's fired unvaccinated doctors. He won't stop the decriminalization craziness of hard drugs. He backs safe supply fully. They won't. It's all over the place. Their agenda has made BC worse off. SOGI 123 is utterly hollowing out the education that BC children are getting. These people need to go. They're just a bunch of crazy student activists who somehow got into government. David Eby would be far more comfortable at a Hamas occupation of a college campus than he is in his own premier's office, because he is a protester who somehow got acclaimed and is now occupying the premier's office, with a strong emphasis on the word occupy. He is simply occupying the premier's office, not trying to actually make life better for anyone, but just trying to implement his activist agenda in the most purest way possible, because he doesn't care if it hurts people. He is a true believer in the Marxist values that he follows, so he wants to establish that agenda as fully as humanly possible. Doesn't matter if deaths are going up because of decriminalization, safe supply. It doesn't matter because he believes in the utopian vision that if we just push big government and these crazy anti-values policies hard enough, that we will break through to the other side into the sunlight and utopia. He's an absolute crazy person. He needs to be removed. And that's why at the start of this video and now, I'm going to urge you, if you live in British Columbia, you have to donate to the BC Conservatives. If you have $5 lying around, just for the solidarity of the matter, give them $5 or $10, give them $100. You get 75% back in a tax credit up to $100. Give them $500 if you can. It's a down payment on the tax cuts that you're going to get from the BC Conservatives. It's the best investment you could possibly make to donate to the Conservatives and then actually see your province turn into somewhere you would like to live again. Vancouver is hollowed out. Victoria is hollowed out. There's so many towns and cities in British Columbia, lovely cities, beautiful places that you would want to ideally live, but bad government policy has made them horrible. It's like San Francisco in the US, it's like Portland, it's like a lot of other, it's like the way that Olivia Chow is turning Toronto into. All this crap needs to be reversed. But anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. Again, BC Conservative donation link is in the description of this video below, and you can also donate if you don't live in BC to my Give Send Go, my legal fund in the description below. I'm being sued by a Chinese billionaire for literally nothing. He's suing us for defamation, and in over 2.5 years, he still hasn't even presented a single shred of evidence to show that we defamed him. In fact, the guest writer who wrote an article where he was mentioned even just used a Globe and Mail investigation of him when he was briefly mentioned. We basically reported nothing new about him, but he's mad that we even mentioned something that he didn't like. But he was too much of a coward, at least in my opinion, to sue the Globe and Mail. So he's suing us a year and a half after that Globe and Mail article came out for merely referencing it in a very mild manner. Anyways, and then also if you are in British Columbia or anywhere else in Canada, you can sign up on my website, WyattClaypool.com, onto my organizing list. I'm trying to get more people involved in politics, point out great nomination campaigns in your guys' local areas, showing different ways you can get involved as actual effective volunteers and jump onto different movements. So if you guys want any specific, political advice, ways you can get involved, ways you can volunteer, sign up on my website, WyattClaypool.com, in the description below. It gives me your email, phone number if you want, an address, so then I can target specific information towards you. I'm not giving my data to anybody else, but allows me to find there's a great race going on in Victoria. There's a great race going on in London, Ontario, and I can find everyone in that area and just send you a quick recommendation for people you might want to check out, campaigns you might be able to volunteer on or help out, and different ways where we can make the country, actually just recover some freedom in Canada, reduce taxes, make the government smaller, all that good stuff. Anyways, see you guys all later. I'll be back with another video soon.